Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Mayor Commission work session. Today is August 16, 2021. The time is 10:02. I do know for a fact that Commissioners Fox and Lambert will not be in attendance this morning due to health reasons. So, and I don't know where Commissioner Peduzzi is, but since we don't take formal action, I guess we can proceed with the work session. So, item 1, historic preservation overview. Mr. Green and Ms. Mittner, I think Commissioner Fox sent us a statement she wanted read into the record to tee this up, right? Do you have that in front of you?
I do, Mayor.
Okay.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Ms. Johnson. Do you want to read that? And I guess that'll set the tone.
Yes. At Commissioner Fox's request, as the mayor indicated, she wanted this read into the record. Thank you so much for hosting this workshop. The unique and historic neighborhoods of West Palm Beach add so much character and charm, and I am proud that our city puts such a high value on preserving its history. However, I also believe there may be times when flexibility may be our most important tool in preserving our structures from environmental and weather issues and concerns. In addition, as was recently presented to us by a homeowner who was having a financial hardship and looking to replace the roof of a small structure in back of her home, there may be times when the state and city codes vary on possible solutions. I am hoping this workshop might help clarify how the city and state codes vary on historic issues, such as environmental factors, and if there are options to include flexibility in interpreting our current codes for extreme scenarios or updating them to reflect more modern problems. Christy Fox, West Palm Beach City Commissioner, District 3.
Okay. Mr. Green.
Thank you. For the record, Rick Green, Development Services Director. I just wanted to do a quick introduction. Frederique Mittner will do the presentation today. She is the city's historic preservation planner. She's been with the city for 16 years. She has served in the past as the president of the Florida Trust for Historic Preservation. And very importantly, what I am impressed with is that she has worked with 20 other cities getting their historic preservation program set up. We do feel that our program does have a lot of flexibility. Certainly we can discuss that and some of the things that we are doing. But let me have Frederique come in and she'll go through her presentation.
Good morning, Mayor, Commissioners.
Good morning.
I have a general presentation, if that's all right, and then I'll try to address Commissioner Fox's specific requests, if that's okay.
That's fine.
Thank you. We are very excited that in the city of West Palm Beach, we have 17 locally designated historic districts, which captures about 5,000 resources. We have 47 individually designated sites. Individually designated sites are just the ones that don't have context around them. You see a lot of those in downtown. We also have 9 National Register historic districts and 18 individually nationally registered designated sites. The National Register is a wonderful honor. However, all the benefits and protections really lie at the local level unless you're dealing with Section 106 and transportation issues. We also have 4 landmark sites, which is really unique that we have adopted that at the local level, that we have that elevated tier that mirrors the national program, and that does allow additional TDRs in the downtown, as you know. To become a designated site or part of a district, the properties have to be 50 years old and meet additional criteria in our code. And how this program was really driven is neighborhood-driven and citizen-driven. The communities wanted to revitalize and preserve the character of their neighborhoods, so we, the City Commission, thanks to you all, have adopted a specific element in our comprehensive plan, element 10, for historic preservation. That is not a mandatory element, but one that the city has chosen to have. We also have codified our preservation program in our zoning and land development regulations, section 9446 through 9453. And I think what's neat about it is that it really encompasses the intention well, and also the bigger picture. So identifying, protecting, restoring, encouraging reuse of resources, because it is actually an economic, educational, cultural, and general welfare benefit. We also have additional contextual zoning regulations. We're one of the only communities that have quantified building size, scale, and mass, which is Secretary of Interior Standard Number 9 in our code. So our zoning mirrors the historic preservation, what would have been an overlay in any other community. So it's very clear and predictable. Oftentimes, when we present to you, you'll hear about the Secretary of the Interior standards for rehabilitation. That's because most programs are based on the National Preservation Program. At the federal level, it's the Department of Interior that covers historic preservation, just like they do national parks. And the three that we use most often are 6, 9, and 10. 6 speaks to deteriorated features, that they should be repaired rather than replaced. The beauty of that is the sustainability aspect. Again, repair over throwing out and putting in new. If you do put in new, it should match the old in design, color, texture, and other visual qualities, and where possible, materials. So that's definitely one of those flexible items where if it's not available anymore, asbestos siding is one example, we can use different materials. Standard 9 is, again, new construction and additions, that the new will be differentiated from the old, yet at the same time compatible with materials, features, size, scale, and proportion, and massing. And 10, this is the do not leave only footprints, do no harm, that if we make a mistake in the future, our decisions can be reversed. And there's actually 3 guiding documents from the National Park Service, the Secretary of Interior Standards for Rehabilitation. Those are the 3 main ones. They've also identified guidelines for sustainability and also flood adaptation, which certainly is an issue here. So we are very flexible in addressing environmental issues as applications come in front of us. We also have in our code additional criteria and our Historic Preservation Design Guidelines Handbook, which is a visual guide for homeowners and how to address modifications. The process, how it works is properties are flagged in our building permit system as historic. So when an owner comes in to apply for a change to their property, we review it. And so this is critical to know that we don't knock on someone's door and say, hey, you have the wrong windows, you have the wrong roofing material, change that. We are not the architectural police. We wait until someone's requesting a change and we just make sure it follows our zoning code, which has these design guidelines embedded in it. So then again, we review it with consistency with the historic preservation section. 93% of our applications are done at the permit level. Most people don't even know we're looking at it for a historic review. Typically, it's a day of review, and we do over 1,000 of those a year. It has been a little longer because we are short-staffed right now, and as you know, the volume of work is crazy. The staff level COA just stands for Certificate of Appropriateness, because again, what we're doing is making sure the changes are appropriate to the architectural style. That takes about a week to process, and our board level COA, which is about 6% of our applications, that goes to our historic board. There's 9 members. We meet 4th Tuesday of the month at 5 o'clock in the chambers, and the request is to submit 5 weeks prior to the meeting. So that's one of the shortest turnarounds we have for all of our boards there. That's process-wise. Outreach, we also make sure that new property owners know that they've purchased in a historic district. It actually comes up in the title search, but I know that's a lot to read at a closing. So we do a mailer to all the new property owners, let them know they're in a district. We attend neighborhood association meetings explaining historic preservation. We do updates via our communication department. We have a plaque program, which is what you see pictured here. People can purchase that for their homes. Street signs, state historic district. We do an annual award program, and then we have miscellaneous educational opportunities such as bike rides, home tours, et cetera, to let people know about the preservation program. And a lot of people seek out the historic districts to purchase in there specifically. Benefits of historic preservation, this is all around the country. I won't go through all of them. Basically mirrors excellent planning policy. Housing affordability, also actually historic properties as a whole are identified as having excellent housing affordability. One of the studies that was recently done that's geographically the closest to us is Miami-Dade County. I have the executive summary at your seats there, which shows that from an affordability, historic preservation districts at large are very affordable. Obviously, preservation is a catalyst for the creative arts. It is home to social and cultural institutions, has shown to have neighborhood stability, lower vacancy rates, and then also the foreclosure rates during the last recession were much lower in historic districts. They're much more stable. So we have really a wide variety of, we don't just have residential buildings, but we have commercial buildings downtown, and I'm sure you saw recently the record-breaking sale of the Como and Harvey building that are historic. So certainly no negative impact on property values. We also offer an ad valorem tax abatement program. The increase in value of the improvement on site is abated at the city and county portion of the taxes for 10 years. It is transferable if the owner sells. You're very familiar, of course, with our TDR program, transfer development rights. We also offer floodplain exemptions. This is coming into play more and more. If someone wants to improve their property by 50% or more, then they have to lift the house to meet FEMA floodplain regulations, as well as the city's 2-foot freeboard requirement. We are able to exempt historic properties, and that has come in quite handy. And the CRA also has a specific grant for historic properties in the Northwest. Enhancing Paradise, again, this kind of recaps the benefits, and the summary sheet is in front of you. Also, Jacksonville, you see that, again, smaller scale incremental development, culture of reuse, a sustainability approach, and again, economics. So there's many, if you don't just love the history or the architecture, there's the economics and the environmental impact. Sales, these are just really quick sampling of properties in historic districts that have sold. Also a study that we've done internally where we've compared historic districts to non-designated historic districts. The increase in appreciation and value of historic districts is much greater than those for new development because it's like a piece of art. It is unique and cannot be as easily replicated. And Park Slope is actually another new construction project in one of our historic districts. So we love the balance of new construction that's compatible in our historic districts. What I think is important to note is that the Historic Preservation Division nor the board, we do not review paint color. You can paint your property any color you want. We do not review interior modifications. And this is an example. This is a house in El Cid. This is the modern kitchen. It's beautiful. We don't review that. However, I'd like to also note that we do not prevent the demolition of undesignated buildings. So you can demo a non-contributing structure in a district, and then there's many buildings in the city you might be surprised are not protected. So sometimes citizens call us or are concerned. For example, Trinity Church in downtown, the Himmel Theater in City Place, not designated. So we don't have protections for those. We just work on the ones that were designated. So that is my overview. To address Commissioner Fox's point specifically, is there is really no state code. It is just local, mirrored on the federal program. And I do believe we're quite flexible. I understand the barrel tile concern. However, that was the appropriate material. It was a very small roof. I think there was a very small financial impact. I think that was still an appropriate decision. From like to like, we were not asking them to upgrade. It was just asking them to maintain what was there as they replaced it. And we are very flexible with our actually window policy compared to many other preservation programs. We allow the replacement of side and rear elevations with new impact windows and the front if they've already been replaced. The only time we're looking for a repair or to follow Standard 6 is if there are still original windows, wood windows, which can be restored. And then there's other impact protection available like armor screen or removable panels, or depending on the architectural style, colonial shutters. So I feel very confident that our program is flexible and is quite successful. I thank you for your support, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Commissioners, questions? Commissioner Shove?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a comment. Thank you very much for the presentation this morning. And, you know, I know I'm one of the only commissioners up here that live in a historic district. And not only have I personally been through this process, I've had several neighbors go through the process. And, you know, I know by the time something escalates to this body, you know, you have neighbors that have varying issues. And I can appreciate that it's not always an easy decision. But I just want to point out the values that we have in our historic neighborhoods, so much so that I know recently Northwood Shores has approached the city to self-designate and become a historically designated neighborhood. One of the things that I think sometimes we forget also that's a benefit in historic neighborhoods is the flexibility of our housing. So we have, even on my street alone, I know several larger homes that long ago were divided into individual apartments. I have varying types of housing that are split plans. They were designed that way, all nestled along single-family residential neighborhoods, working in harmony together. So it does provide additional flexibility, and I think some of that really distinctive neighborhood feel that West Palm Beach has. So it definitely contributes. And so I'm appreciative. I know typically the conversation is around windows. And so you touched on it a little bit, Frederic, but if you could talk a little bit about the window replacements as it pertains to having impact windows. So I know from experience there's a number of neighbors in my neighborhood that have been able to replace their windows, understanding every instance is unique. Could you talk about the process for that? Because I know there's a staff level approval process, and sometimes it does escalate to a larger process.
Yes, happy to. So when a homeowner chooses to replace their windows, sometimes they reach out to us right away, otherwise they go into the building permit process. But basically, if you've already have your windows replaced, they're not the true, original, authentic windows, then you can replace them with impact throughout the building. They just need to be architecturally appropriate. So let's say they were a single hung where it goes up and down from the bottom, then you replace it with a single hung window with matching the light pattern that was there before. That's the grids. So that's just basic building permit if you've already had replacement windows. If you've never replaced your windows, or a previous owner has not replaced windows on that structure, then we are looking to see if the front windows can be restored. There are, again, companies that restore them. That's mainly if it's a wood window. If we have steel casements, those are much more difficult, and we do allow replacements for those. So restoring just the front facing, just the street facing elevation, and adding other hurricane protection means there, whether that's armor screen or removable panels or colonial shutters or whatever may be appropriate for that building. And then we do allow replacement on the sides and rear. So that gives the homeowner the flexibility of just having to deal with one facade during a storm, as they're prepping for a storm event.
Thank you. And Mayor, if I may just follow up too.
Yes.
I wanted also to touch on the previous situation that Commissioner Fox had referenced, because to my memory, it wasn't actually a financial issue, because there is a program that allows an applicant to apply for financial aid, if you will. So could you talk about that, and what is our process for looking? Because I know historic preservation can be quite costly at times. And so how do we look to say, I know the city owned a property actually that we did a historic renovation on, that ended up being, the renovation costs were higher than what the market would drive. So if that were a residential homeowner, can you talk to some of the financials that go into it and what considerations we take?
Yes, sure. So on that, we do not have a financial aid program. So I do want to put that out there. We do not have funding available unless you go through a normal housing and community development loans or any other mechanism. But for historic preservation, there is not a specific one unless you're in the CRA district. But we do have an economic hardship provision. So if it is a hardship for you, then we are able to grant you a different material. And that has happened multiple times, actually. Even in El Cid, an elderly woman couldn't replace her flat concrete tile with concrete tile. She got approval for shingles at the board level. We've had that in other neighborhoods as well, where an economic hardship was found. This particular applicant chose not to embark on the economic hardship route because it does require you to reveal your financial information. So we do take that into consideration when it's a hardship, but we don't have aid available.
Thank you very much.
And if I recall, they didn't pursue
They did not.
the hardship program. They objected to the length of the application or
Yes.
something like that. So,
Correct.
okay. Commissioner Warren.
Hi, thank you. Is it possible for you to send this presentation to us?
Yes,
Thank
I'd
you.
be happy to, of course.
And can you go back to slides 8 and 9?
I'm sorry, did you say 8?
I did.
Okay, this is 8.
Because I was just looking for the benefits, because we went over those pretty quickly.
I know, I did. I just didn't want to bore you too much, and I know there was a specific ask of Commissioner Fox, so.
Thank you. I'm never bored with the information. When it comes to the historic designation and the benefits that have been identified, is there a difference in the historic designations when it comes to like the Northwest neighborhood? When we look at a resale value of a property in the North End that may show tremendous benefit to be designated historic, do we find that is a challenge? And
So speaking specifically to the Northwest neighborhood, the program and policies are the same throughout. I haven't done a study on what the resale value is in the Northwest. I have seen some just on my own, and certainly the prices have been going up there as well. I don't know if it's consistent in the same percentage other districts. I would probably say not, but it has been going up. And I do have to say, I get a lot of calls. I get the group, RLAC, calls me all the time, frustrated when there's demolitions, and I think there's a big group that cares about preserving those buildings in the Northwest neighborhood. So because the Northwest neighborhood has lost so many buildings and there's a lot of vacant parcels, there's really not that many left to preserve, and so I think it'll actually in the end result in a beautiful balance of new construction and historic properties. And one of the things that a property owner in the Northwest can take advantage of, just like anywhere else, is our ad valorem tax incentive program, where the increase in value due to the work they do to their home, including additions, new construction like a garage, that increase is abated for a period of 10 years at the city and county. So that's would be a good benefit for a property owner in that district. So I can't speak specifically to the increase in value there. We certainly are seeing a lot of new construction. We take at least 1 or 2 a month to the board for new construction in the district. And I do believe, because we have a design review in place, I believe the product is coming out better than if we did not have that available.
You have a follow-up, Commissioner?
not at this time.
Okay. Frederick, I love the information that we got from Miami-Dade County. Do we have anything analogous for our city?
We don't. I'd love to have us engage in a study focused on West Palm Beach.
Well, how much would that cost?
I would have to get some numbers on that, but I'd be happy to get that back to you.
I mean, because I think that would be very helpful to our residents or those looking to move into our city to understand whether these benefits carry over to our historic districts.
Yes, thank you.
Take a look at that, and let's
Thank you.
talk later as to what something like that would cost.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shove.
Thank you. And I just wanted to touch on something when you were speaking with Commissioner Warren about the ad valorem tax exemption program. Can you elaborate a little bit on that? Because I don't think that I'm exactly clear on, I know it from a renovation side, but looking at some of the potential benefits from a new build, can you talk about the benefits of that program financially, what it would mean for homeowners and how that can help to build that homeownership?
Sure. So it is not for total new construction. It would be if it's an accessory structure built like a garage or an addition. I'm going to use just random round numbers because it's all in the eyes of the property appraiser's office. So if the property appraiser thinks your overall value is $300,000 and the land is worth $200,000 and your improvement or your structures on site are $100,000, but you do an addition or you build a detached accessory structure. Let's say you spend another $100,000 building that, but in their eyes, that only increased your value, your improvement value, or what you're going to be taxed at another $50,000. So now you would normally pay taxes on $150,000 worth of improvement value. Land value has stayed the same. That increase in $50,000, we abate that for 10 years at the city and county portion of the tax bill. Your other taxing authorities, school board, water management, those all go up. And so it really depends on the size of the square footage you've added, the value you've added, and how they've reassessed it. So we have property owners that are saving several $1,000s a year to several $100s a year. But again, it is a nice benefit. Over 10 years, you can save a good amount of money, because anywhere outside the historic districts, you would have been paying that anyway. So it's very comparable to the TIF program, where the increase in value is what you're getting rebated, but it's through the historic preservation program.
And does that transfer with the sale of the property?
It does, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Item 2, Airbnb vacation rentals. Commissioners Lambert and Schoaf wanted this brought up, but Commissioner Lambert isn't here. Commissioner Schoaf, do you have any opening comments?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you to Mayor and Administrator for getting this onto an agenda. As our city grows, we are attracting more and more visitors and some investors, and even some homeowners that partake in short-term rentals and Airbnbs. And while we have many that enjoy quietly visitors coming to our city, more and more we've started to see these issues bubble up. And I understand from the state level, short-term rentals are one of those issues that we are sometimes curtailed on due to the state legislative body putting in their own regulations. But I wanted to have this conversation today and explore what at a city level we could do to just encourage the quiet enjoyment of home rentals. Again, certainly happy to have individuals exercise their personal property rights, but not at the detriment of our neighborhoods. And what we're finding more and more is that we have some of these nuisance properties. So wanted to have the discussion today about how we regulate these issues and what we could do to escalate them if we have bad actors. So that was the intent of bringing the agenda item today, and happy to have this conversation. Thank you.
All right, very good. Madam City Attorney.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the Commission, Kimberly Rothenberg. So I think I'm going to start with a little bit of background so that everyone's at the same starting place. So what is a vacation rental? The Florida statutes defines a vacation rental. In essence, it's any unit that's a single-family, two-family, three-family, or four-family dwelling that's rented for a period more than 3 times a year for less than 30 days, in a nutshell. Prior to 2011, the legislature had no regulations specific to vacation rentals, and local governments were able to impose any rules or regulations that they wanted as it related to vacation rentals. Fast forward 2011, the legislature took action that limited local government's ability to regulate, but let some of those governmental entities who already had regulations on the book keep their regulations. So sometimes you might hear, well, the city of Boca Raton has regulations that are applicable. That's because they were pre-2011 and they weren't touched. So there are some jurisdictions that do regulate vacation rentals. The city of West Palm Beach at the time that the law was changed did not have regulations on the books already that regulated outside of what's on the books. And I put in front of you, just so you would have it, this little pamphlet that the communications department put together to help everyone understand the types of laws and regulations that we do have on the books that are applicable to vacation rentals, just like any other rental. So your noise regulations, your parking regulations, your sanitation regulations, changes to historic structures, all of those laws and rules that are already on our books are applicable to the owners of the vacation rentals also. It's a matter of enforcement. Receiving complaints, investigating the complaints, or otherwise being aware of complaints and sending them through the code enforcement department, just like any other rental that there is out there. So what the legislature did in 2011, it didn't prohibit all regulation vacation rentals, which is why we can have our noise regulations, our rental licenses, sanitation, those type of things that are applicable to everyone. But what they did say is you can't regulate the duration, i.e. require somebody to rent for at least 30 days. You can't regulate the frequency, and you can't prohibit vacation rentals in specific zoning designations or zoning categories. So that's just kind of a broad summary of the preemptions themselves. So there's a number of jurisdictions that we looked at and reviewed legislation that they adopted after 2011 that regulate quote-unquote vacation rentals specifically. And this is a list of some of those jurisdictions, ordinances, and regulations that we looked at. And I put in a chart form kind of categories that you see repeated over and over. There's a vast majority require a registration of the property to be noticed and registered with their particular jurisdiction that they're a vacation rental. In that registration process, there's a requirement to prove that they have the appropriate state licensure, the appropriate business tax receipt from both state and county level, that they've had the inspection, life safety, building minimum standard inspections, that their pools, if they have pools, are consistent with the Florida statute, that they also have regulations that are, and properties that are in compliance with the fire safety standards for carbon monoxide, smoke detectors. They require leases with specific notification in their leases. They also have some specific regulations relating to parking, occupancy. There's a few jurisdictions that require that the property owner certify that before they rent, they've checked the sexual offender and predator list. There are posting requirements inside the units that require that these laws and rules that I just went through are posted where the occupant can see them as it relates to noise, garbage, the appropriate licensure and things of that nature. They also require a designated representative so that there's a person that the code enforcement or police or someone can contact 24/7 if there's an issue at the property. There are some jurisdictions that require that they comply with the Florida Public Nuisance Law, which regulates sale of drugs, prostitution, criminal gang activity, compliance with noise ordinances, notice to the homeowners association or other association if it's a condominium type property, that they comply with solid waste or fire extinguisher laws and requirements. Now, I say all of that to tell you that just because the city of West Palm Beach doesn't have a specific ordinance that requires vacation rentals to be inspected for minimum house and life safety standards, we do that under our rental license for all properties that are rented. The public nuisance statute that relates to sale of drugs and prostitution and criminal gang activity, stolen goods, that's applicable to all properties, whether or not they're vacation rentals. We also have a requirement that property owners who rent property provide an agent so that we have notice and an opportunity to cite the appropriate person. Are there things that we could adopt? There probably are. Do we want to? I think that leads us to our next slide. What would you do? What type of things we'd want to know? What type of things are you interested in looking at to incorporate or to create some special regulations for the city of West Palm Beach? We'd also want to get in contact with these various jurisdictions. It's one thing to put regulations on a book. It's another thing to know whether or not they've been useful or successful in any way in number one, changing whatever problems that you're having in various neighborhoods. So I called, for instance, Wellington, because they're the most recent jurisdiction that adopted new regulations, and it's one that was on the list of the various jurisdictions that we looked at. And I said, well, since you've had your regulations on the books, how has it changed things? Have you had an opportunity to use it? One time they cited somebody for not having a business tax receipt. Does that change noise complaints in your neighborhoods because you have this new regulatory process? Those are things that we would want to look at and then come back to you and let you know. I think that administration would also have to take a look at, for instance, if you started a new program that was a registry program, we have a vacant property registration that we outsource to a third party that does that for us for a price. If we had a new registry program that required registration, additional inspections, and then renewals annually, do we have the staffing currently to do those additional functions? So I think there's a big analysis that needs to be done based on, number one, what are the complaints specific that the city and its residents are seeing? How would we appropriately address them? And if some of these potential code changes would address those, what would be the cost and can we get it up and running? And that's pretty much my presentation in a nutshell. And I'm available for questions.
Questions, Commissioners? President Peduzzi?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a quick question. Pursuant to the 2011 legislative acts, we're only preempted when it comes to the length and the duration, but we can promulgate regulations in all these other areas.
Yes.
Okay, and
The areas identified, we also, when we looked at the jurisdictions, we also looked to see whether or not there was any litigation that challenged and found that those regulations were not consistent or were not appropriate under the preemptions, and we didn't find anything.
okay, certainly we as a legislative body then can set some of these parameters for these vacation rentals. What about the powers of HOAs, POAs, and condos? They can do some of the same things that we're talking about here, correct?
And I think that that's the purpose of some of the municipalities requiring that they provide proof that they've in fact told the HOA or the other regulatory agency, because those agencies do have more power to say whether or not that type of vacation rental is allowed in their community than we, the city of West Palm Beach, has.
One last follow-up. Those entities, the HOAs, POAs, and condos, would not be prohibited from regulating length and duration, would they?
I would have to look at the Florida statute as it relates to those specific entities, but it's my understanding that they do not have the same restrictions that the local governments have placed on them from the legislature.
Thank you.
Commissioner Shove?
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. It was certainly educational on my account. Looking at the place where we can perform, so I think this pamphlet is really helpful, and if everybody followed the guidelines that were within the pamphlet, we would be fine. But it's the issue that we have bad actors that will not follow these regulations. And so I guess my question is, how do we have the homeowners themselves self-police? And I guess where I go in my mind is that seems like it's a suspension or a fine, some sort of measure that prohibits that behavior or discourages it from happening again. Because what we have now is these behaviors happening that wouldn't be okay if they were a neighbor who owned the home and are not okay being a short-term rental, but they're just difficult to enforce. So neighbors can call police week after week after week, and police can come out and enforce and shut down what's happening now, but then when it's a new group that comes in and causes a nuisance the next weekend, they're still at this place of we're enforcing to prohibit the symptoms instead of addressing the core issue.
Well, like we have with all of our rental licenses, we require a certificate of use. That in addition to your rental license, you get a certificate of use that allows you to use the property for the purposes that it's been applied for, the use. And if the property owner has chronic nuisance problems and excessive, let's say, we'll use it for an example, noise complaints, there is an opportunity to cite that person for a suspension or revocation of the certificate of use, assuming that we have the record necessary to establish that and bring it before the special magistrate. But it's a matter of complaints, documentation, enforcement, and then crossing that line where there should be a ramification for that, for noncompliance, which would be a temporary suspension or revocation of the certificate of use, and then they wouldn't be allowed to rent for a period of time if they lose their certificate of use.
Sure. And I think, you know, my intention here is that I would just like to have good actors throughout, and whatever the mechanism is to get there, you know, certainly do I want to create a system that is difficult for staff to enforce or requires a ton of more resources? No, if that's what's necessary to get the goal, then certainly I'm supportive of going in that direction. But things like our rental licenses, I know throughout COVID is when it really started to show who had a rental license and who didn't, because we had a number of people renting during COVID when they were prohibited from renting and throwing parties. So it was easier to identify throughout neighborhoods where these existed. And if you look them up, many of them had expired rental licenses, et cetera. So how can we, you know, understanding that if I apply for a rental license this year and then decide next year not to rent out, you know, the home that I own, there's no way for the city to police that. So is there a better way? You know, right now we're relying on neighbors to report issues that are coming in. Can we regulate from the place of administration, or is there a better way to kind of police that?
I'm going to go from memory, and I'll have to get with code enforcement to see if this is still a process that they follow, but the certificates of use, when they come up on annual renewals, oftentimes prompts the code enforcement office to go out and check when there's a non-renewal and to cite for non-renewals. If at that time the defense of the person is, well, I'm no longer renting, they would file the appropriate documents to say that they're no longer renting. But I do have to check with code to see if they still are in the practice of following up on certificates of use. I believe that they are.
Okay. And then from the legislative standpoint, I know we can't regulate frequency, duration, and we can't prohibit altogether. Some of what's happening throughout our neighborhoods is that we have whole blocks that are now vacation rentals. And, you know, I know many of us are very concerned about the fabric of our neighborhoods and you know, to the mayor's Neighborhoods First initiative, to everything that we do here in Chambers, we focus a lot on our neighborhoods. And while we can't regulate the private market of home ownership, I understand having, you know, 6 homes on a block and one that is owned with a permanent resident starts to eradicate the fabric of our neighborhoods. Now we're just a rental community and a short-term rental community. So is there a way to regulate the saturation of vacation rentals, short-term rentals?
I can tell you that there is an attorney general opinion out there that says no, but there is not a case that where it goes from just opinion of the attorney general, not to, I mean, it's persuasive authority when a court looks at a question, but there hasn't been a court that's looked at whether or not it would be appropriate or a violation of the law to limit, or let's say to put a distance separation between the uses. But the attorney general is of the opinion that that's preempted.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments on this particular item? Commissioner Shove.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my question would be, what are our next steps going from here? I know this is an initiative that would have to be taken on by administration. Is there any appetite for us to try to look to see, again, I'm not trying to create undue hardship or, you know, a complicated system, but to try to get some actionable item going forward. I know there are a number of other states that have regulations, which, understanding Florida is a different state than Texas, Savannah, Charleston, et cetera, because we've had neighbors bring forward examples of what's been done in historic communities, for example. So is there any next step items that we can do with this to try to get some additional regulation to prohibit some of these behaviors?
Well, I'm not sure what you're asking for. Are there particular behaviors that Florida municipalities have incorporated that you're looking for us to incorporate? Are there particular behaviors that you feel that are not governed by? You got to be more specific, so I don't know where you're going with this.
Sure. I guess if we could look further into the saturation issue to see if there is a way forward for us to start to regulate so that we don't have short-term rental communities.
We've got an answer to that question. She says there's attorney general opinion out there which prohibits us from doing that.
But also, I think what I heard was that there may be a path forward because that hadn't been challenged. That was one opinion.
No, it's the Attorney General opinion, which is usually advisory. It's not an opinion of, I mean, that's fairly conclusive. You could tell me what.
If we, the city of West Palm Beach, decided to go out on a limb and impose separation requirements on existing or future, let's not say existing, let's say future vacation rentals, and they challenged, and there's the preemption, you have a couple of things going on. The other side is automatically going to say, look, Judge, there is an Attorney General opinion out there, it's persuasive authority, they adopted the legislation, they know what they intended to preempt. We would have to battle against that. And keep in mind, and I'll have to go back to the last year's legislative session, I believe that the state adopted a law that said if there is an express preemption and you go forward despite the express preemption, there's some individual and some municipal liability for doing that. So we would want to be very careful, but we can certainly look at it. We can also talk to our legislators during this legislative session to see if there's some appetite to create an ability to do some regulation. But I can tell you that every year since 2011, in addition to what preemption is already there, there's been attempts to do further preemption, to stop such things as the things that these local governments are doing currently as it relates to local governments. So I don't know how much, how far we'll get with that, but we can certainly have those conversations.
So understood on that. I believe during part of the presentation, there was an indication that we could have suspensions or fines associated with our code if we could look into those items. Again, my goal would be to have owners self-regulate rather than having neighbors have to call to have PD regulate. So to the extent that we can enforce additional regulations to encourage the good behavior instead of having to enforce against the bad behavior.
Suspensions and fines, again, for what behavior? I mean,
What I was pointing out on the one slide that was there, the various local governments with their new regulations that they put into place, they enforce them through either fines, like we do, or through suspension of the certificate of use that they had imposed under their registration program. But it's similar to the program that we have in place now. So if somebody violates, say, an ordinance for parking or noise or sanitation or some of those other issues, our remedy is fines and suspensions already. So those are already the enforcement mechanisms that are in place that we can use, but it always has to start with somebody identifying a violation of the code, and it's not usually as a result of the property owner saying, oh, I violated your code, you know, what can I do to fix it?
So is perhaps the next steps I'm understanding that on individual basis, I just need to connect in residence with whom? With code enforcement, with the city attorney's office to try, because we have these situations ongoing in our neighborhoods now. If we have a system in place to deal with them, then I'm happy to navigate residents over there. Thus far, residents have been reporting into PD week after week.
Noise. Is it noise?
Noise issues, as well as, you know, according to their account, again, I didn't verify with PD, it escalated to shots fired. And so, you know, I have this chronic issue that keeps coming in this neighborhood and in others. And whatever system, whether I'm not connecting them with the right system, but the issue is not getting addressed. So I just need to know where to take it from there. If it's my issue of not connecting into the right place, I'm certainly happy to do that. But I guess that's what I'm looking to do is say, where do these residents need to go to have these issues addressed? And then if that system isn't working, how do we adjust that system?
No, it's code.
well, if they're a
It's
code,
code. It's code enforcement. I certainly can, I mean, I think I was copied on the email. I can have a meeting with code enforcement, bring it to their attention, and see if it's something that's on their radar that they're working on, and give you some information back on it.
Sure, and
and if you have a list, spreadsheet of specific complaints that were registered, that will be helpful, because then we could go to code and say, listen, on such and such a date, we made these complaints, or over in August or June, or we had these number of complaints. What specific action was taken?
Sure, and happy to do that, because it's not just the issue that's on 28th Street. I've had it on Flagler Lane. I've had it down on the east side of 26th Street by Curry Park. So it's come up in a lot of places. Happy to escalate that into the system. I just to be clear on the actionable step forward, it's code enforcement. And should I escalate to the supervisor of code
Commissioner,
enforcement?
I will meet back with you.
Okay.
And hear what your concerns are and have conversations with code enforcement.
Perfect. Thank you.
The more specific information, the better, with respect to the
Absolutely.
complaints. So we could follow up and see what happened.
Sure.
Anything else? Okay. I don't have anything. Oh, I thought you were holding, you are holding up your hand? Oh, okay. I don't have anything on the mayor's matter. So yes, you have something for the good of the body?
Yeah, and Mayor, I'm not looking to put the administration on the spot, nor am I necessarily looking for an explanation. I was just hoping to get an issue on a future agenda, and it hadn't been responded to because I think the fire chief was out of town. My request for a workshop on staffing of Fire Station 8, and hopefully we can put that on a workshop in the near future.
Johnson,
Yes.
I think that's already, you have it somewhere, don't you?
Yes, actually, I have been working with Chief Maddie, and as you indicated, she was out at doing the Surfside and getting back, in gear. So it is teed up for the August 30th work session.
Thank you.
Anything else? Commissioner Warren?
Thank you. I continue to process the original presentation on the historic preservation overview. And I can appreciate that you, Mayor, made the recommendation that we can look into a possible study. I think that that would be beneficial because as I continue to process it, I see that I think about the general parameters and that they're not equitably beneficial to all of our communities. So as we move forward with that, and I hope that we do move forward with the study, I would love to see that there may be customizations that may be community specific, that may allow concessions based on the needs of the neighborhood and how this program can benefit those neighborhoods based on what they specifically need, because they're different. It's very different from El Cid than it is on Tamarind. If there's a historically designated facility there or building there. So as we move forward, I would just like to see that there's some, instead of it being just blanket and general for all of the historic communities, that we can consider adapting what may be specific to each neighborhood or each community if there are some specific things that we can identify.
Well, the question is whether we could do that from a legal standpoint. If we have an ordinance that is a citywide ordinance, I don't know, Madam City Attorney, you could weigh in, whether there could be modifications, adjustments based upon a particular neighborhood, and what the findings would be in order to have either exceptions or tweaks neighborhood by neighborhood. Is that something that can be done?
Generally,
yeah. It sounds like that's where you're going.
That is what I'm asking. I'm asking this because I think that there are some things that when we look at property values and resale values, that improvements and things that may be needed for a property in the Northwest neighborhood may not have the same return on their investment as some of the other communities. And if there are things that we can do to assist based on those geographical needs, is that something that we can consider? Is that something that any other community is doing? And as we review this, maybe there's something that we can glean from other areas that have been successful.
And perhaps that's something that could be looked at as a portion of the study, when you look at what the benefits are to the various
Yes. That's my question,
areas.
if that can be included
And then we
in the
could get
study.
direction from there, and then from other, again, when we look at proposed code changes, we obviously want to make sure that we're consistent with what is a good practice throughout all of those who do historic preservation, and that we're not impacting our historic preservation efforts by what we do in our code. But I think the first step, obviously, is the study, if in fact that's the direction that the city wants to go in.
Well, let me talk with the city administrator about the feasibility of a study, and then we'll obviously have to discuss the scope of the study. But I understand what your concern is, and I would think that the study, it seems like you're saying that we will want the study to certainly identify any differences from one community to another to see if there's anything significant there. So we'll talk about that internally as to what that study would look like, what types of issues that could be resolved. We'll probably have to put it out for an RFP, so when we put together the RFP, we'll run it by the commissioners and make sure it's covering all the bases you all are concerned about before we put it on the street. Does that address your concern at this point? Okay. Anything else? Okay, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody.